Changeling Space Program. By Chris Overstreet. Poster's note. This is a long chapter. In MP3 format it's over 3 hours long. So I am going to cut this into 6 videos. And due to how long the videos are, I am going to be posting 1 video per day for 6 days. End poster's note. Chapter 14, Mission 22, We'd be happy with any data at all, really, Part 1 of 6. 17 days had passed since the immense, complex multi-stack mission R4 had launched from Eden and climbed into space through a massive ball of fire. Now the tiny remnant of that mission, the expanded capsule and the data container box, screamed through the upper atmosphere of Equus in another, totally different ball of fire. That ball of fire happened to be on the other side of the planet from Equestria. That didn't stop tens of thousands of space tourists flocking into Eden anyway, eager to watch via telepresence the return, 374, of the first spacecraft to touch, if briefly, the surface of another world. And with the tourists and the self-important dignitaries, 375. There also came the press, all of them demanding an exclusive interview with the pony due to go up in another couple of weeks. That annoyed the pony in question, who wanted nothing more than to get back into the simulators and practice for said launch, and wanted nothing less than to tell another woolly-headed reporter, 376. For the 92nd time her answer to the question, "Aren't you afraid you'll die out there in space?" 377. Ironically, Cherry Berry discovered that the best way to be safe from any one reporter was to be in the largest group of them possible at once. Under normal circumstances the reporters would do anything in their power short of actionable assault to prevent their rivals from asking the great question that would deliver the all-important scoop to the lucky questioner. But if that failed, Cherry could always pretend that the shouting from the reporters was too loud for her to make out any actual questions. And, of course, if the crowd of reporters was stuffed into a balcony row above you and separated by a hoof rail, and further prevented from shouting questions at you by flight control rules, so much the better still. Thus Cherry Berry stood at the back of Eden Space Center's mission control room, watching along with 50 reporters and camera ponies and 31 VIPs plus Queen Chrysalis while the controllers monitored the fiery descent of Mission R4. "Steady on course for target periapsis altitude," Warner von Braun said from the bullpen. "No temperature alarms at this time." "How's the apoapsis?" occupant asked from his spot at the flight director's station. "Falling steadily," von Braun said. "Not as quickly as I'd prefer, though. We're keeping an eye on it." The Minotaurs had known when planning the mission that the Mission R4 capsule would return to Equus faster than any artificial object had ever traveled before, much faster than any prior capsule returning from space. The remaining fuel in the ascent tank after leaving Minmus hadn't been enough for a fully powered deceleration into low Equus orbit, and so there had been no choice but to come straight down from Minmus. No abort, no second chances, nothing but a computer, a series of radio relays, a remote pilot, and an ablative heat shield stood between Mission R4 and destruction. Knowing this in advance, the Bulls had settled on a target altitude for descent, well within the atmosphere but nowhere near as deep as prior missions. If the trajectory ran too deep, the heating from atmospheric compression would overwhelm the ablative heat shield and destroy the probe. If the trajectory was too shallow, the ship would pass through the upper atmosphere and back out into space on a week-long orbit which might even hit the moon on its way back out. Indeed, if the angle of descent was really shallow, the ship would be bounced out by air resistance and sent flying on a totally unpredictable trajectory, possibly even out of Equus space entirely. The Bulls knew all of this, but they didn't really know where the altitude ought to be. They were guessing. They called it other things, but Cherry knew it was just guessing. Even after 25 launches, their collective understanding of the dynamics of the upper atmosphere qualified as next to non-existent, as their consistent failure to accurately predict splashdown points of re-entering vehicles made clear. They'd even admit it themselves if pressed. This was one field of rocket science where Twilight Sparkle's operation outclassed CSP completely. Cherry Berry watched every moment closely because, in a matter of weeks, the fireball in the sky would be her. If Mission R4 got it wrong, well, they lost a probodibyne and a capsule and most of the scientific data gathered from Minmus. But if Mission 22 missed its target coming home, Cherry Berry would be incinerated, crushed, or sent on a week-long round trip out beyond the Moon's orbit, with no food left in the ship. Any of those outcomes, of course, meant a bad day. Cherry Berry did not intend to have a bad day, and the next step on her road to not bad day having was Mission R4's safe landing and recovery. That meant the bulls had to guess right. Coming up on predicted periapsis, old George Cowley called up. Of course we'll come a bit below that, since we still don't have good enough data to predict atmospheric forces on trajectory. But it should have dropped a lot lower already. Cherry Berry looked at the velocity reading on the telepresence projection. Mission R4 had been in atmosphere, technically, for 4 minutes already. But even with air resistance slowing it down, the ship was still going much faster than the next fastest mission, the one she'd flown with Princess Luna as passenger. Descent rate just dropped below 100 meters per second, Cowley added. Apoapsis 500,000 kilometers and falling. That's not fast enough, Dragonfly muttered. Ship stable on retrograde. Battery consumption 0.01% per second. Cherry Berry nodded. That was actually better than it sounded, since the electrical flow readout couldn't go below 0.01%. The system probably drew less power than even that. That gave the ship plenty of time either to land or to get around the nighttime side of Equus and back into the sun, where its solar panels could recharge the electrical batteries. Ship still descending at about 50 meters per second, Cowley said. Decelerating steadily. No heat warnings, von Braun called out. All systems nominal. Periapsis. Cowley wheezed. Ship is now gaining altitude, repeat gaining altitude. Apoapsis prediction at 390,000 kilometers and falling. A bit of muttering came out of the observation gallery. Cherry ignored it. The ship going back up wasn't a failure, not yet. The ship's velocity, and the resulting predicted apoapsis, that was the important factor. And so far, that sounded almost on schedule. 390,000 kilometers 250,000 miles was roughly the distance to the Moon, which meant, worst case scenario at this point, an orbit of less than 6 days. The important thing was, that was now the only bad day on the table. The ship obviously hadn't skipped off the atmosphere. It wasn't going to burn up either, not with the heat shield functioning as intended and the ship continuing to decelerate. Continuing very slow ascent, Cowley said. Ship continuing to slow. Predicted apoapsis below 250,000 kilometers. On the telepresence screen the fireball and shock wave continued unabated, unchanged so far as the outside observer could tell. But the numbers next to the display told a different story. The ship flew only a little faster than an ordinary orbital flight now, and its speed continued to decay more and more. The display flicked over to the map readout, where the ship's trajectory had once looked like a rubber band at maximum stretch, it now looked like a goose egg shrinking down to a duck's egg, and from there to a chicken egg. That bird's coming down, she said, and then jumped at the racket of camera shutters clicking and flash bulbs going poof. She didn't know it yet, but that bird's coming down would be the headline of 2 of Equestria's major newspapers, and, thanks to microphones in the gallery, a sound clip on absolutely every television newscast covering the event. But if she didn't know, she also didn't care. Once she'd recovered herself, she walked over to the control room doors and left, not looking back. She'd seen the important part important from the viewpoint of Mission 22, that is. She didn't care about the parachute's opening or the actual final spot of splashdown, 378. Mission R4 had survived and come down at the target altitude, and Mission 22, which would be virtually identical to R4 on re-entry, would do the same. So, that question was answered. Now Cherry needed to get back to work making sure Mission 22 got far enough in its flight to have that safe landing. Footnotes 374. Or destruction. There is some cross-grained bit of most intelligent minds that, when watching a dangerous endeavor in progress, anticipates its failure as much as its success, if not more so. Or to put it another way, even if nobody wants a train wreck to happen, almost everybody wants to be there to see it when it happens. 375. And a couple of actually important dignitaries, though their presence must be considered coincidence rather than by design. 376. Since there are no sheep in the equestrian press, this epithet, otherwise to be deplored, may be safely used. 377. This is a question asked by reporters of astronauts in every universe that experiences a space race. The astronauts never give an honest answer, and the reporters don't expect an honest answer, but they keep asking it. Possibly, if the dumb question constant of the multiverse were more closely studied, we would have a better understanding of how reality is structured than we do now. 378. The South Luna Sea, well east of Australia. Recovery teams had been stationed from Braylon all the way to farthest reaches southwest of the Forbidden Jungles, just in case. But the recovery ship had been stationed off the Adequate Barrier Reef, because Lucky Cricket had drawn that station out of a hat, and Chrysalis knew when to back a winner. End footnotes. Twilight Sparkle announced a launch date for their pink monster, Chrysalis said. Cherry didn't look up from her work. Horston's Summer Sun Celebration Festival had ended with the dawn. Daylight this far south was too hot to allow for much in the way of festivities. And since the changelings were only interested in the holiday as a source of either food or souvenirs, it hadn't taken much persuading on Cherry's part to get the simulators up and running again. So, as she asked, when, she continued flipping switches back to their launch settings inside the test capsule. 2 weeks from now, Chrysalis said. 4 days after your launch. She said it would be a simple orbital mission to test the launch and landing systems. How are they getting the ship up? Click, click, click. The princess had this huge orange fuel tank built, Chrysalis said. I don't know how she did it, but she actually managed to make that ship of hers even uglier to look at. Anyway, the fuel tank pumps fuel to the ship's onboard engines. That, plus 8 of our Thumper solid fuel boosters, are supposed to get that thing into orbit. What do the Bulls and Goddard think about it? Click, click, click. I haven't asked them yet. But if Miss Smarta-Goody-Two-Shoes Twilight Sparkle thinks it'll get to orbit, I suspect it'll get there somehow or other. Chrysalis frowned at that thought. I don't know why it is things always work out for you ponies, somehow or other. The magic of harmony, Cherry muttered. Click. You ought to give it a try. Click, click, clack. Done. Do you want the next session? Some creatures strive for perfection, pony, Chrysalis replied smugly. But some of us were merely born that way. Take all the time you need. Says the pony who isn't going, Cherry muttered. Pony? Chrysalis asked. Now what have I done to deserve such a terrible insult as that? I don't know, Cherry replied. Maybe you should ask your lawyer for the current list? Occupant, I'm ready on this end. Not so fast, occupant. Chrysalis glared her subject into immobility, then poked her head into the capsule. Don't you have anything to say about the launch date? Not really, Cherry said. Who's going up? Rainbow Dash and the pretty princess herself, Chrysalis said. Sparkle hasn't even trained as an astronaut, and she's going up. If she wants to be a tourist, she should buy a ticket. I don't think she's going as a tourist, Cherry said, strapping herself back into the test capsule's flight couch. I think she's going as a last resort escape system. Chrysalis froze. Yes, she said quietly. Rainbow Dash is too valuable to sacrifice on an untested ship. Yes, I can just about see it. I wonder. Don't even think about sending a sabotage team to Cape Friendship, Cherry said. And how will you ever know if I did, pony? In order for it to work, you'll have to send changelings from the space program. Changelings who know what to break and how. I know pretty much all of them, Chrysalis. And from me they keep no secrets. 379. They would if I ordered them to. They'd try to if you ordered them to. Cherry gave the straps one good tightening yank and concluded, do you really think they'd succeed? Chrysalis grumbled, I was just saying it was an idea, and pulled her head out of the capsule. The hatch shut with a slightly unnecessary bang. Footnote 379. Cherry had been around the changelings at the Space Center long enough to figure out she didn't actually need to question them about anything. When they thought they were among their own kind, changelings gossiped. Changelings didn't chew the fat, they masticated the adipose tissue. And after more than a year of being not just a constant presence but a person of some authority within the program if not the actual hive, Cherry Berry had been mentally filed by the space program changelings as one of us. As a result, Cherry Berry had had a lot of practice in forgetting a lot of things she never wanted to know. End footnote. Hey, look! It's Cherry Berry! Cherry groaned. With the run-up to her launch, Eden had flooded with space tourists, beyond the ability of the changelings to keep corralled in the guided tours. 380. She couldn't walk between buildings in the Space Center anymore without at least 2 interruptions to sign autographs. But, since she thought of herself as a polite pony, she smiled, signed the autograph books, posed for the photos. 381. And then politely excused herself. But no sooner had she gotten free of one family than... Hey! Ooh! Excuse me! Excuse me! 2 grown stallions galloped up to her. One was wearing the adult-sized Cherry Berry brand aviatrix helmet, with flight goggles. And a t-shirt saying I rode the fun machine. The other stallion mainly wore a face that spoke eloquently of the depths of his embarrassment that he knew the first stallion. Excuse me, miss, the stallion with the helmet said. We're looking for Cherry Berry. We heard she was here today. Could you tell us where she is? The other stallion groaned, reached up a forehoof, and slapped the first stallion in the back of the head. Ow! The first stallion looked at the second. What was that for? The second stallion stabbed a silent hoof at Cherry. Oh, the first stallion said. You're right. Looking back at Cherry, he said, I totally apologize. I forgot my manners. Would you please tell us where we may find Cherry Berry? Stallion number 2 groaned a little louder and administered a slightly harder wake-up tap to the back of stallion number 1's head. Ow! Hey, I apologized. Stallion number 1 moaned. What ya trying to do, mess up my helmet? Stallion number 2 gave Cherry a perfect see what I have to put up with look, then reared up, lifted the cheap souvenir hat off his friend's head, and plopped it on top of Cherry's head. Somewhere in stallion number 1's head, the penny dropped. 382. Oh, he said, you mean she really is? Just get your stupid autograph, number 2 grumbled, and leave the poor mare alone. Then in a kinder voice he added to Cherry, sorry about this. Good luck on your mission. Cherry Berry smiled politely, signed the autograph, posed for the cheap disposable breezy, trademark. 383, camera, and tried to make progress once more towards her destination, the astronaut center kitchens where the mission meals were to be prepared. She hadn't got far before encountering something that looked like a changeling had got into a fight with a paint mixer and lost. In fact, as she looked more closely, paint was still dripping off the poor thing. The colors weren't bad, as colors went. The changeling had at least tried, unsuccessfully, to keep the turquoise of his mane ridge, tail, and wing covers separate from the calming peach tone he'd chosen for his body in general. Had he had the foresight to apply the turquoise first and wait until it dried before attempting the peach, it might have worked. Instead, the colors were running together in rivulets that ran down the bug pony's body, defining every curve. Cherry was disturbed to notice. Of his body and draining, even more disturbingly, into his leg holes. Hi, Miss Cherry, the changeling said cheerfully. What do you think? About what? Cherry asked, hoping and praying against all expectation that she could avoid the obvious conversation to come. About the new me, the changeling said, gesturing to himself. Sclerite gave me the idea. She thinks the tourists will be less spooked and more likely to give us love if we look like ponies too. He grinned ever wider, and Cherry squirmed as little runnels of paint dripped down his fangs and into his mouth. I picked the colors myself. The blue stuff matches my eyes. They're very nice colors, Cherry said, the only polite and truthful thing she could say. But, could I just ask you one teensy, weensy little question? You wanna know where I got the paint? The changeling asked. Well, they're having a sale at the general store in Oreton, so. No, Cherry said. I was just wondering if you'd run this little idea by your queen first. Nope. I wanted it to be a surprise. The changeling actually looked proud. I figure I might get a promotion out of this. Oh, and Sclerite too, just to be. Cherry's restraint snapped. She grabbed the sticky changeling's shoulders with her forehooves and shook hard enough to send paint drops flying. Are you suicidal? She asked. Hey! Hey! The changeling managed to get loose from Cherry's grip. 384. What do you mean by suicidal? Confusion turned to worry. You mean you think the queen won't like it? No, Cherry thought, I mean she'll think you stepped out of the nightmare she described to me once, in detail, and pound you into paste in a fit of panic. But I can't tell you that, because I promised not to tell anybody else. It's always a bad idea to surprise Chrysalis, she said instead. You've known her longer than I have, you should know that. You spend more time around her than I do, the changeling pointed out. Well, Cherry said, for now, let's go wash off that paint. Shan't, the changeling said flatly. I like my new look. It feels like this is who I am under the chitin. And besides, it matches the wings. Look. The changeling opened his wings, which Cherry noticed didn't have a single hole in them, 385. And they glittered almost as much as Luna's star-filled ethereal mane. Cherry rolled her eyes. Maybe not suicidal, she thought, but suicidally stupid. Look, she said, you're a changeling. A shapeshifter. Why didn't you just shapeshift into a pony, if you want ponies to be calm around you? I'm tired of hiding who I am, the changeling whined. I mean yet, the first time you go on an infiltration mission is really exciting, and there's this thrill about fooling ponies and maybe getting caught, he sighed and finished, but it gets old, you know? And being scary isn't as much fun as the queen makes it seem like. Okay, fine, Cherry said. But you need to let Chrysalis know about your idea before you show her the new. I'm sorry, what's your name? Leopard, Miss Cherry. Leopard. Nice name. Cherry took a deep breath. Leopard, there will come a day before too long when any pony, or anyling, can show to the world who they really are, without fear. Within reason, I mean. To be perfectly honest, she was quite happy with Chrysalis not showing the world who she really was. Fake Chrysalis was much nicer to be around, and real genuine authentic brutal and possibly genocidal dictator Chrysalis, well, Cherry hoped that Chrysalis would be very afraid of showing her true self in public. And if you want to live to see that nice and happy day, you'll come with me right now to the infirmary so they can get that paint off of you before your queen sees it and murders you. I'm not fooling around about this, Leopard. You really think? Without even pausing to think about it, Cherry said. And you know as well as I do she wouldn't lose a minute's sleep over it. Ah, okay. The defeated changeling hung his head. I guess it's just as well. My tummy's been aching ever since this morning. Cherry watched more runny paint run into the changeling's mouth as he talked. She said, did you make sure the paint you bought is non-toxic? The changeling looked at Cherry in confusion. Would ponies really sell toxic paint? He asked. I mean, what would happen if somebody just happened to come by and take a bite of some pony's house? Right, Cherry sighed. She wasn't getting to the kitchen until after lunch. Come on. To the infirmary. You have a date with some paint remover, and a stomach pump. It just seems irresponsible, is all I'm saying, Lepid muttered as Cherry began dragging him off. Footnotes 380. The large numbers were helped along in no small part by the simple fact that most of Equestria had no idea just how hot Eden really was in summertime. The owners of both Horston's brand new hotels, the Old Tavern and the inn in the original village, and the changelings who rented out the unoccupied Astromare quarters for special guests had no inclination whatever to pass on this information, at least not until the non-refundable charges were in the bank, in the safe, under the mattress, or buried in a mayonnaise jar out back midway between two cypress trees. 381. Cherry still didn't quite know how she felt about the cheap little fake aviator helmets with goggles the gift shop had begun selling to the foals and fillies who visited. 4 times she'd marched into the shop to demand they be taken off the shelves as having nothing to do with actual spaceflight, and 4 times she'd been silenced by the young ponies eagerly trying them on and making whoosh-whoosh flying noises. After the 4th time, when one of the fillies was a Pegasus trotting along the floor on her hind legs, spreading her forelegs like wings, and going whoosh-whoosh along with the other kids, she'd given up. But she still wanted to say something every time she posed alongside a grown pony wearing the things. 382. If you choose to imagine that the metaphorical penny inside Stallion 1's skull did not plunk so much as clang sonorously in the silence of the otherwise vast and empty space behind his eyes, the author will not try to convince you otherwise. 383. Because Equus hasn't got any brownies. 386. 384. Hooves are not renowned for their gripping power, and the changeling was still covered with runny paint, so this wasn't especially difficult. 385. They did, on the other hoof, have quite a lot of paint splotches and streaks on them, even though the changeling's elytra had scraped most of the loose paint off. 386. So far as any pony knows, anyway. Not of the elfin variety. There are plenty of the baked goods kind to be found. End footnotes. What do you mean, my menu is all wrong? Heavy Frosting asked, a very dangerous tone to his voice. I mean, look, Cherry said, pointing at item after item. This doesn't have any cherries in it. And neither does this, or this, or this. That's right, Heavy Frosting said. That's because of a mysterious little thing I like to call variety. I'm putting together meals for 20 days. You're going to be shut up in that capsule for at least 15. You're going to need variety in your meals or you're going to snap. I need cherries in my meals or I'm going to snap, Cherry insisted. And don't tell me you can't get them. Cherries are in season in every orchard that grows them across Equestria. But you're going to get tired of eating nothing but cherries after 2 straight weeks. Heavy Frosting insisted. I'm willing to risk that, Cherry said. Hasn't happened yet, though. Asterisk. I confess, Rarity said, looking every bit as uncomfortable as Cherry Berry felt, that I wish I could find some more, dignified way of doing this. The two of them stared at the newest edition of the spacesuit undergarment, which, well, left one critical thing to be desired. 387. And as inelegant as the solution is, the White Unicorn continued, please bear in mind it is the best I can do while juggling the requirements involved. After all, the suit has to be chafe-proof, easily donned and removed in a tiny space, has to assist in temperature regulation. Yes, I know all that, Cherry said. But it's still a full-body diaper, isn't it? Well, there are inserts. Rarity's face curled up in a truly epic combination of disgust and regret. Although the smell in the capsule will be unfortunate, unless you find some way to discard diapers. And, of course, there is the toilet in your capsule seat, Rarity continued. You mean the plastic resealable bag with germicide held under the seat? Cherry asked. Yes, I'm aware of it. I'm very aware of it. You could even say I'm outright fascinated by it, and wondering how the buck I'm going to. Language, dear. Sorry, Rarity. Cherry pointed to the undergarment again. But still. Diapers. And sanitary wipes, Rarity pointed out. The lining of the undergarment is very easily wiped clean for diapers. Rarity gave up. Yes, diapers, she admitted. I'm very sorry. We shall endeavor to achieve an encounter which carries the craft over one of the poles, von Braun said, pointing to the design drawn on the whiteboard. A polar orbit gives us the best chance for completing the temperature scan contract on this mission. The danger lies in this massif here. He pointed at one of the images taken by Mission R4. This rises almost 7,000 meters above the level of the ice plains. A low orbital pass as might be required for the temperature scans risks an impact. You'll have to be aware of that at all times. Cherry gripped her pencil tighter in her teeth and made a note. She grunted. Of course, if the burn goes poorly and a polar orbital insertion becomes unworkable, von Braun continued, we shall simply launch into a polar orbit after landing. We would prefer not to do that, however, because it would complicate the return to Equus, requiring multiple burns to achieve atmospheric interface. Translated, it'd be a lot harder to get home. Cherry made another note. You'll be provided with surface sample kits, von Braun went on. Ideally you'll land on one of the ice plains near the coastline, so we want surface samples from both of those points. More samples would be better, if it's not too dangerous. We may even consider hopping the ship for this purpose, if you feel up to the challenge. Cherry let the pencil drop out of her teeth. Sounds like my kind of fun, she said. Translated, it sounds absolutely suicidal, but it's a kind of flying absolutely no pony else has done before. Therefore I am so there. Asterisk. Wow, it really doesn't take much thrust to stay up, Cherry said from inside the simulator. I know, right? Dragonfly commented from outside. There's next to no gravity there, apparently. I wouldn't like to try to hover forever up there, but there's a lot of leeway if things go wrong. Like with Mission R4? Cherry asked. 2000 and descending at 40 meters per second. I could have fixed that if it wasn't for the time lag, Dragonfly said. Are you sure you're gonna clear that ridge? Oh, hang on, Cherry tweaked the controls, and in the circuits of the simulation computer a phantom spacecraft tipped a bit more vertically for a few moments. That should be enough. Yeah, Dragonfly said, looking at the readouts. But it pushed you beyond your landing zone. You'll need to brake a bit more. I'll make it work, Cherry said. Outside the capsule, Dragonfly looked at Occupant, who shook his head and pushed a switch on the simulator's master console. Inside the capsule, the simulation entered the interesting bit. Footnote 387. Technically two things, number 1 and number 2. End footnote. End of part 1.